And it's strange seeing events from 90 plus years ago, little children acting out play. Now, what she said was very true, and I was doing genealogy for a long time, including here and other places. I have a lot of sisters, and thus I have a lot of nephews and nieces. I did family trees for all of them. And I ran out of nephews and nieces for a while. But lately, the last 2 years, last year I had 3 great great nephews and nieces, and 3 more will be born this year. So I have more trees to do. But something else happened 9 years ago. So in 2015, this is my 10th year of doing tours and presentations. Well, in 2015, at Christmas time, my sisters decided, all my sisters said, we're going to have a competition. And the competition for Christmas is we're each going to make twice a Christmas dinner and a Christmas dessert. So a week apart, my sisters sponsored a competition, and they made a dish, and then 7 days later, a dessert. And the judge was me. And I was going to judge who won, right? And they knew I was so blunt, I would say it, I won't say everyone, but I had to eat part of all the dinners and part of all the desserts. Now, which would not be bad, except I have 9 sisters. So, I had to sit down for a couple hours and eat. And of course, they said, take more, because they wanted to win. And so, at the end of doing this, by January 1st, I got on the scale, and I was 10 pounds heavier from December 1st to January 1st. So I said, I need to lose that 10 pounds. And what I did 10 years ago was start walking the Holyoke Canal system in the absolute cold at night, and I would do 3 miles every day at least. And so, in the cold at night, you tend to lose a lot more weight when it's very cold. So I lost the 10 pounds. And that got me started on not genealogy, but rather local history. So tonight we're going to do 250 and 252 Pleasant Street. It's one home. All right, now I passed on a sheet to you in the beginning. On the front of that sheet lists a lot of information. And one thing I do for 10 years now is every year I have a new charity based in Holyoke and such that they serve the young people of Holyoke. And Lighthouse Holyoke is an alternative school on Ray Street that tries to have high schoolers develop their own curriculum. Okay, and like I said, I do historical tours of Greater Holyoke. For 10 years I've been doing Holyoke, Chicopee, and South Hadley, and I now add on Granby, East Hampton, and Amherst, and next year I'll add more. And I try to do lots of different places, parks and reservoirs, so forth. All right, now, this Saturday is my last tour of the year. And my friend Tom in the back of the room and I will go around the block that forms Mysterious on the sidewalk and talk about what points outwards from Mysterious. Look at other people's houses instead of just the Skinner's house. And he's going to talk about the trees that are both inwards and outwards from the sidewalks. So if you want to join, that's going to be at 11 a.m. Saturday. And I'm also promoted every year for 10 years by the Holyoke Preservation Trust. And they happen to have next Saturday one of their events from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. It'll be an art competition. And it'll be at the Holyoke Heritage State Park. All right, now the funding almost every year comes from Massachusetts Cultural Council. And this will be definitely the Holyoke Local Cultural Council. All right, I have private sponsors. Now, which else are we doing? We're doing this one here, 2024. But if you had come here approximately 24 months ago, we did the first one ever. And it was very popular because when that house was made, it had that tower on there. It doesn't, probably since about the 1950s it was taken off. But that's on Linden Street. And then last year, I did a house on Chestnut Street. You are on Chestnut Street now. This is 2 blocks away from here. And that one, most of its history was a daycare and still is. But this is the one we're doing this year. Okay, like I mentioned, I use the resources of Holyoke Library a lot. So, this is the house, and it's been a lot of things through the years. Look at the very first one. In that year, 1917, it was built. Okay, it was built at the same location as that now, and the first job that it had was to be a community house, a place where people could come and talk, enjoy each other's presence, or you could have a wedding there, and a few people were married there. You could meet with dignitaries there, and Calvin Coolidge's wife showed up there once, and she loved it very much. But in the same year, it was also a school. Now that school did not start there. That school started somewhere else in Holyoke, but when it had the opportunity, moved to that location. In September of that year, it started with a new school year with students at this new location. So the community house started first. Highland Park is the name of the neighborhood that it's in. It's not the Highlands, it's the Highland Park. Anything pretty much above Fairfield Avenue towards the north, up to about the entrance for the White Street Reservoir is considered Highland Park. And the neighborhood loved being at group events. They used to meet for a while at Jones Point Park, but they wanted to be indoors. And the father of Highland Park built this home, and I'll show you his pictures. Now look at the third one down. Can you believe it? They wanted to knock it down. It was built to be a large place for a school and for a community house, but they wanted to knock it down. So someone bought it out, and they wanted to take it down and build a new home there. Right? That did not happen. They owned it for 7 years. And then finally, it became residential. The first person to take it over, he got a permit from the city to make it into 2 units, so 2 families could live there. So he could bring his wife there and live there, but he could also lease out the other half of the house. And then the last family that's been there for 60 years, they happen to be here too, and I'll introduce them at the very end. They're still there after 60 years. Okay, so who made this house? I'll show you his picture. Samuel Hoyt made it. He built lots and lots of homes in the North Pleasant Street area. Okay, he probably designed it and definitely constructed it, and he might have worked on it himself with his own construction workers. He loved the concept so much that he wanted it done, and it was done very quickly. He loved the neighborhood so much that he would live in his own homes that he built for other people until they sold and then moved somewhere else within the neighborhood. And then the style is called a Tudor revival or a neo-Tudor. Think of Shakespeare. All right, and this is he, Samuel Hoyt, the father of the Highland Park. And that's important because 2 other companies tried before him to get Highland Park developed, and they both failed. They got to the stage of where they could landscape the land, but nothing was ever built. And those attempts happened in like 1905, 1906. Another group came in 1908. He came to Holyoke in 1910, and right away he saw the opportunity and bought out the construction team that was up there. And he was so determined that he did it. All right? He would live, like I said, in many homes that he built. And then he would move house was sold. Now this house is on Dartmouth Street. And he would live, and besides in this house, he would live in 8 more homes in the Highland Park neighborhood. And then he would also live in a couple more homes in Holyoke. When he retired, he would move out into the next neighborhood. But he would end up living in 10 different homes in Holyoke that I could see. And I think these are some of the homes that he had constructed. Of course, he had many more than just the 8 that I mentioned. He probably did, when I go up there and look around, I probably did at least 20 homes, and probably much more than that. Now, the homes out there in Highland Park were supposed to be all very high-level homes for high-income people. But if you go into some of the side streets, you don't always see that. You see some homes that seem to be from the 1940s and 50s. And that's because when he came in 1910, and he was gung-ho doing this, great. You could build several homes, but like you know, in 1929, the Great Depression hit. Almost all construction of new homes came to an end for a while. Right? And so when you look at the Highland Park neighborhoods around this area, there are some modern homes around there. But this was his company, Highland Park Associates. He had a one-room building, and it was the first home on the right on Yale Street, but it was knocked down when he retired. And he would use that to meet his customers and ask them, do you want a home built a certain way? And he would do that. And they were almost all gorgeous homes. Okay, and his construction firm owned all this land here and much of the land across the street. So you can see all the side streets. Now, if you look at this, you can actually see the ravine right here. This is the ravine. All right? The house we're going to talk about is over here. The house that he constructed in order to run his business was right at the edge of Yale Street. That's right here. Now look at, he wanted to have 2 parks. Right? Those were thought about beforehand, but he was the one that really pushed to get them going. 1910, and he said, build this park up here. That's not the name that it ended up having. It would be called Jones Point Park. And the grand plan that he wanted the city of Holyoke to have was to have this be a very elaborate park. Now it's called City Park for a reason, because it wanted to compete with another park that was in the same situation. That was called Mountain Park. Mm-hmm. Mountain Park in 1894 started right over the border of Holyoke in Northampton, right short of the White Street Reservoir. And it grew very quickly because it had a trolley going up to it on Northampton Street, went right into the park. But Mr. Hoyt said, let's get a park within the city itself that's a little closer, a little smaller, but the city can own this one, and it'll be called City Park, and it'll compete against Mountain Park. Now sadly, we had great plans made, but this might be hard to see for some of you. This is a plan by the Olmsted brothers, the sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, to make City Park, which would be called Jones Point Park, and they did it. They made this plan from about 1912 to 1913. The only part that really got built was a playfield, and the other portion, it says concourse, and it has entrance out to Pleasant Street, The part that's below that, including the pool, the shelter, the playground, was never built. And so in 1912, they were finished making this, and they were supposed to keep going and keep building. And the city just gave up. Maybe it was because Mount Park was beating it. They did say that no one was showing up here. Why, to most people, why stop here when you can go on a trolley up to Mount Park, which was a lot bigger? Okay, so you had a concourse up here, then that Pleasant Street. But what the city did also do was encourage the trolley company, Holyoke Street Railway, to build a trolley, the 8th and final trolley ever built in Holyoke, up to Pleasant Street, up to this location, and stop there. So they wanted this to be the equivalent of a trolley park. A trolley park is a park owned by a trolley company that was built for people to get away from the city. This was going to be the city-owned equivalent, except it never worked out. And they just gave up on it. But this was Samuel Hoyt's idea also. And the trolley was the 8th one to come along Holyoke, and it went right up Pleasant Street to Highland Park neighborhood. If you look at Pleasant Street very, very carefully, right, maybe it's better that you get out and walk along the sidewalk of Pleasant Street. And you're past the house that we're going to talk about tonight. And if you walk another maybe 150 yards north, you'll notice that the breakdown lane on the eastern side of North Pleasant Street is very large. And then all of a sudden it stops and it goes inwards and the road is a lot narrow. The reason why is the trolley went as far as that point, it narrowed that. And at that point, there was opening out to the park, and people could walk down to the park. Within 3 years of the park being open, they sold that plot of land, the house was built there, and gone was the grand idea of having a trolley park. Okay, now 1917, this home was built, and the map you see over here, this is a 1911 map. You see there's no house there yet. The house would be right here. But you do see the ravine, right? And you see Mr. Hoyt's business. You see Hill Street near the top. The first location on the right, he put his little office. That was taken down. But he also would build this home down here, and that was his great project for the neighborhood. He wanted people to go there. And notice also that it had a bit of a driveway through this area. I think Mr. Hoyt probably put that in too for some of his workers. Okay, and then later, how did the house develop? On the left-hand side, you see a map. I believe that map is from the 1930 or 40s, and you can see the house fully developed there. Okay, now here's the story. And the first tenant will be that community house. It would also be the new school. So a private school would come in, and a clubhouse would come in into Samuel Hoyt's new house that he was building. And they give you the size. It'd be 1 story high. It would be where the Lawrence School was. Okay, and for 6 years, it did 2 jobs. And probably on weekends is where they had the opportunity to have it be a community house, Saturdays and Sundays. On Monday through Friday, they probably were school, and then sometime you could probably do the community house every day. But people were being married there, inside the house. And that's exactly what he wanted. Mr. and Mrs. Coolidge loved Highland Park neighborhood greatly. In fact, they would have their own home constructed on one of the side streets of Northampton Street, and they would use that as a summer vacation Mrs. Coolidge was the most social of any of the president's life. She loved to be around people. She loved to write letters. She wrote many letters every day to lots of people. And she was all over the place on visits to people, including she was a guest at the committee house. And there's a picture of her towards the back. Of course, Mr. Coolidge is right there. I believe one of his sons died very young. All right, now the first tragedy happened, all right, in April 9th, 1923. They had a fire there. It wasn't serious to the point that the school could not continue. They had to move into another house nearby for a while, but after they fixed the damage, they could come back. The community house, though, moved out and they never returned. My theory is that by 1923, they already had a clubhouse at what was then called the Mount Tom Golf Course, and they probably moved a lot of the neighborhood activities into that clubhouse. Okay, and there's the first picture made by the school to advertise themselves. Okay, and I noticed something, and Eileen is the one that pointed this out to me. The L has an accent, and this L has an accent. When I saw this, I said, whoa, that's just a flaw. When they made the picture and the type, they had flaw. But she said, no, both L's are accented here. What could it possibly mean? Are there two forms of L in the English language? It turns out there are two forms of L, and I never realized that. Most people don't realize that. When you say L at the beginning of the word, it sounds different from if you say L at the end of the word. I never realized until I probably said L about 100 times when I went home, after Eileen told me. I said there must be a difference. So I looked on the internet, and yes, in the English language, there's two forms of L. L at the end of the word sounds slightly different when it's at the beginning. But they're saying this L is the same as the end of the word. It's very rare, and that means that the true pronunciation of lover in school is not lover in school. It's lover in school. You say low instead. And so most people have been saying it through the years, lover, but it's lover in school. And that's why they put an accent. And plus, they're an educational location, so they want people to say it the right way. Okay, and this is their second school year in that building. They're getting a new principal as of that year, Doris Kimball, and she would stay along for a very long while. She would make the school grow to about 40 students. It covered kindergarten up to 9th grade by the end. And she would increase the enrollment up to beyond almost 40 students. Whereas in the beginning, when it was no location, it would stay around 5, 6, 7 students. Okay, and they're saying here, Lauren School, a new private school, started in 1905. So it didn't start at the Pleasant Street location. It started at Oak Street. And that home is still there on Oak Street. It's on the nicest part of Oak Street in terms of the nicest of the homes. And that home would have 5 students the first year. It would have a new teacher, a Miss Clary, and it would be named after her for about maybe 6 or 7 years. So it was the Miss Clary Private School. And she would live in the house. The owners of the house would also live in the house. And the only reason they started it was because there was another private kindergarten and first grade in Holyoke where the woman went into retirement in June of 1905. And they wanted to have a school, a private school for young people. And this is it. It's 253 Oak Street, still there. It's the last home on this block of Oak Street. It's on the western edge. Okay, and I tried my hardest to find evidence of students going there. And Holyoke every year has to write down every student go, every school in Hoyt. So they go through a census of all of the young students. And I went through a binder that had about 120 sheets to it. And I found Doris Ramage. James Ramage owned a paper mill. Doris was his daughter. She would be 6 years old when I found this in 1911. And where is she going? To Miss Clary Private School. Okay, and this school was owned, or I'm sorry, the school was privately run, but it had a benefactress named Mary Loverin. She started life as Mary Randlett. Her father was the president of the Hadley Falls Bank. He was very, very rich. And she was married to Ernest Loverin, who was the agent and the treasurer of the Valley Paper Mill. But she had a son who was named Ernest Jr., and he probably went to another private school for 1 year, but in 1905, he would be enrolled in this new school, in this Clary Private School. And that's where it had its beginning. Right, that whole block of Oak Street has a special name called Fairmont Square. All right, it has 12 homes on it. All of them look kind of the same. They're all Queen Anne Victorian homes. They all have a brick facade on the first floor. Right? The only one that doesn't had it taken off, and that's the one right there. And the whole block, city block, is quite different from the rest of Oak Street and very different from the rest of Holyoke, because that city block on the very ends at the intersections of Hampshire and Oak Street have rounded curbing, where almost everywhere else in Holyoke you have a square curbing going up to the intersection. And this person made it, Leslie White, decided to round off the curves, and he put big fountains in the middle of them. Okay, so the principal through the years, Lilla Clary was the teacher and principal. Doris Kimball took over in 1918, and then you had two others later, but you notice Doris Kimball served him 11 years, and she really got that school to a very high enrollment. Okay, and they mentioned that they're going to have a graduation. 25 years they've been around. And every year they have a nice graduation. They invite the parents for the graduation. And also, during the graduation ceremony, they'd have theatrical performances where the children of the school would be the actors. Okay, now there's one strange event that happened there. One very strange event. And that was, in 1932, two men drove up to school, and they stayed in their car, but there was a boy outside. And they asked a young boy of 10 years old, "Can you go get Juanita the Holyoke?" They said her name, Juanita, as if they knew her. And he was smart enough to say, "This looks very strange, because no one does this during school day, and these are not her parents." So he went to the school, and right away he found the principal. And he told her about the event. And so she rushed to the door, but the two men themselves were also very suspicious, because he noticed the boy had paused at the door and looked back at them. And what they did was take off at a very high rate of speed. So the principal called the parents They said, no, there's no one going to pick up Juanita. So they were trying to kidnap her. The police were called, and for 5 days in a row, the Holyoke Transcript had newspaper articles on the event. This is 1932. Remember, I think a year or two before this, Charles Lindbergh had lost his son to kidnappers and had killed his son. This group of two men might have had that thought in their head. Her parents, Juanita's parents, were very rich. And maybe these two men had figured that out, and they're trying to kidnap her for money. A very strange event, though. Okay, and plenty of graduation pictures through the years. This is 1936. And you can see a lot of girls were going to this school compared to the boys. And most of the graduates would go on to private schools, especially one in East Hampton, one in Northfield. And this is 1937. You notice also the amount of people going is getting smaller, right? And they would end up closing down. Yes, in 1939, they would close down up to 34 school years or 35 calendar years. They would close down. It says 35 years, and that's correct if you count calendar years. So they were closing because the enrollment had gone to such small levels. All right, and so someone bought it out in 1939 with the intent to take it down. Paul Dunn wanted to take it down. And that was 1941. He told Holyoke, I want to take it down. 1946, he finds someone to buy it. And that family would buy it and fix it up and make it into a two-family. Okay, who was that? Well, it was Joseph Pelkazarski. And I wish I could find a picture of him. I tried very hard. I asked Mark, who's here. He didn't have one. I wish I did. Because he loved music so much. And he would go around the area, play at places in Springfield, including at the one listed here. It was said he played with named groups. And he also, on the national stage, played with named bands. I can't find the name of the bands he would play with. He was a player of the saxophone, and he did play mostly the big band type of music. I wish I could also find a record that would have his name on it, but most records back then wouldn't have the full name of the band on them. They would only have one leader, and that's it. So, sadly, I cannot find his picture. But he did many things in life, so we'll talk about them. And he moved in there with his wife. His wife was his second wife, and this was her second husband. They would live there from 1947 until 1964. Now, notice she dies in 1963. I think he might have been saddened by her death. They had no children. Even with his first wife, he had no children. And so, for 18 years, he had lived there with his 17 years with his wife. Now, symbolically, I put here on the bottom that I hope to find a picture of both husband and wife someday, and a record, one of his vinyl records. Now, I said it wrong, not a vinyl record. It would be a 78 record, and 78 records are extremely fragile. They're really shellac and easy to break. So to find a certain record is very hard. He did play with Duke Ellington at one time. Now, he did all this from about the age of 18. His obituary said he graduated from Holyoke High School. When he didn't graduate from Holyoke High School, his sister probably wrote the obituary, and she got that wrong. But he was a musician from a very, very young age. And even during the Depression. And during the Depression, it would have been hard to get a job in any field, including as a musician. Sure, you could survive, it would have been very hard. But it was known that he was a musician in what's called the Federal Music Project. And that's part of the Works Progress Administration. The federal government started up certain programs, and one of those was a Federal Music Project. And that did exist around the Holyoke area. All right, and what they would do is go to schools or go to ballrooms and play, and they were funded by their federal government. Okay, and it's known also by looking at the directories that besides working in the WPA project, he also worked as a teacher of music under the WPA projects also. And so he probably helped students either in Holyoke or Springfield. I don't know which one, but he would have gone and taught the saxophone to the students. And again, he was paid by the federal government. Also, even though he was a bit old, he was born in 1905, when World War II came around, he entered and he became, I think he was a private, our sergeant right there. He played music for his military job, right? And he did that for at least 2 years. Okay, and here's his obituary and also his wife's obituary. He's buried in a Cherry Hill Cemetery in Bethel, Vermont, so very high up. And it had enough in here to, I was able to recreate a lot of his life. Okay, but it says here that when he did buy the home, 1946, by 1947, he was able to have the divided home, and he took one half of the home, and his wife stayed with him, but they took in tenants. And the first tenant that came in, 1947, 1948, was Henry Baker. Okay, then his second tenant to come in, either 1949 or 1950, was a person named Hart Lester Allen. And she would stay for a very long time. Okay, and who is this Hart Lester Allen? Right. Now, Mark Gianfrido, did I say it right, Gianfrido?
Yeah.
And his mother wrote a book. And who did they write the book about? About the tenant that would live there from 1949 about, and would also live there even when the new owners came in. So the house got new owners in 1964, and I think as requirement, when Takazarski was selling the house, he said, you have to keep my tenant. That's a very peculiar offer, but I think it happened. She happens to be a person whose husband is very famous, right? He had died before she moved in there. But who is she? Well, her husband is Joseph Allen. And Joseph Allen was the one hired by the governor and I think the head of banking in Massachusetts. And his job was to break up Charles Ponzi. Now, who's Charles Ponzi? His name is so famous now because of what he did. He ran a Ponzi scheme. And a Ponzi scheme is when you take in money, put it in your wallet, and tell people, sure, I'll pay you back a certain amount at a certain time. The first people coming in, he said, 3 months, I'll give you another $100 beyond the $100 you gave me, right? And as long as you have a lot of people joining the scheme in the beginning, you can do that. But at the moment you start losing patrons, or they slow down, is the moment at which your scheme is going to be exposed. And this scheme was tried about 10 years ago. And the person got away with it for a very long time. But Joseph Allen, husband of Hart Lester Allen, was the one that got onto a scheme and broke it up. And the Gianfridos wrote a book about this, their tenant, and it was called Good Night, Dear Heart, Good Night, because they had become good friends with her, and they loved her story very much. And I read the book. It's a page turner. It's excellent. I enjoyed it very much. I read it within a 24-hour period. It was that easy to read. Okay, so they had a very famous tenant. And you get to see her picture there. The picture is the same one except it was cropped. Right? And this book is still available, I believe. Okay. And I gave my copy to the Holyoke History Room, so there are copies in the library. Okay, now that's another one of her pictures. Right, she graduated from Smith College, and her name was Hart Allen, and she was married, of course, to Joseph. And what did she love? She loved 78 RPM records. Now I wonder if the Pelkazarski family, Joseph Pelkazarski, knew that she loved music and got her to be a tenant there, or did they both coincidentally love music and they developed fondness from each other, and did that fondness go over to Mark? And I think one of the historians did. She would play 78 records for him. And this part, I had to get Mark's permission, because usually I don't do living families when I do these, so every time I do a house in Holyoke, I'll stop a few years beforehand. Like when 2 years ago, I did a house on Linden Street. It was 8 families that lived there through the years. I did the first 6 families and then stopped. But I got Mark's permission. This is him at 5.5 months old in the Hoyt transcript. And he did say that he could tell me about some things, but I quickly found this, and so I said, I'll just do what I find. And this is him. He still looks the same. And he's the one at the very top there. And you notice they did a whole sheet, a whole page in the transcript, just devoted to babies born in that year. So the Gianfridos moved into the house 1 year after his birth. Okay, and this is saying that they did move in there. It's a gorgeous story. The owner's husband, he worked at Ed Mackey, but he also worked in the fire department as a chauffeur.
No, he was in charge of all the trucks.
Mechanic?
Yes.
Okay. Now, notice something. This paragraph is totally wrong. Definitely, the Lovern School was built in 1917 at that location. And the Lovern School was never built off subscriptions from the children that wanted to go there. It wasn't 1904 at all. Okay, so that paragraph is incorrect, but the rest is correct. Okay, and there's this picture up in that corner is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Gianfrido. That's Tina.
Yes.
Okay, and I guess she won a centennial. Did she win a contest to be up there? Probably.
No.
No, my parents built the float.
I
Oh.
designed the float, my husband built it.
Okay.
And so rather than put the mayor's child in there, we're
Uh-huh.
afraid of hitting any lights or any
Electric
wires.
lines
Oh,
or anything
good.
like that, so
We're in-
sacrifice.
and we had-
And there she is. Is she
And-
here?
No, she lives out of town. She's
Okay.
out- Yeah. And we had a fellow, who's very well known and just recently passed, Gary Rudd walked along and made sure that all the wires were fine when she went through.
Oh, wonderful.
The city.
Yes. Now, you were on the 100th anniversary group that had a gala, had a parade. Yes.
I was the secretary.
Secretary, 1973. Okay. Last year was the 150th anniversary of Holyoke. And last year I said in December to a wide audience, does any house want to enter a competition where I'll do that house the next year? So December last year, I was contacted by 4 owners of homes in Hoyt. And they're all wonderful, except 2 were short of being 100 years old, and that was one of my requirements. So yeah, I only had 2 choices left, and this is by far the best choice for a lot of reasons. In particular, because I was on the 150th committee, and she was on the 100th committee. So I said, that's a good start for me, and good enough for me. Plus, I used to be a school teacher, and this used to be a school. Okay, so that is Tina. Okay, and this is the inside of her homes. It was featured in an article in the Holyoke transcript. I think this is Mark. This is Mother. And they're both here today. Mark would never wear plaid. Like
Yeah,
that.
love those plaid pants.
And that's their house, and they talk about the house's development. A lot of these articles I'll put up onto my webpage, so you might be able to view a lot of these. Okay, and like it says here, the brother and sister put on at least one television show. Okay, Channel 40, Strum.
Yeah, Strum and Drummers.
So Mark is mostly a pianist,
Yes.
but you're also a conductor of a jazz orchestra.
I direct the jazz program at Mount Holyoke.
Okay. So he's been into music his whole life from a very young age, and has paid off. He's become a professional musician. And so thus, the house was, in the very beginning, a community house that had a lot of music in it. It became the home of the Pelkazarski family, who was a professional musician, and has continued to be the home of a professional musician. So that house, 107 years old, has been nothing but be the home of musicians. And that is a wonderful thing. Okay, this is the father, Roy Gianfrido, and he fixed the vehicle, or was in charge of fixing the vehicles. And Tina and the mother, I believe, or Tina wanted you to buy a franchise with Carvel, I believe. And you did. And so for about 20 years, 15 years, you ran a Carvel in Hoyt. Okay, and they're hard to find. There's hardly any around anymore. And does she still do cook things?
My daughter?
Yes.
No, she works on a computer.
Okay. Okay, so 2 years ago I started this house. Last year I had this house. And this year I had this wonderful house. Right? And what am I going to do next year? And remember last year I asked for input. Well, this year I'm not going to ask for input, but the way it is next year happens to be 2 anniversaries. It's the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War that the United States started to get their freedom. And Hoyt has 41 men that fought in the Revolutionary War buried in Hoyt. Maybe I could do one of their homes if I could find one. And the oldest home in Holyoke is 1761, and there are several homes from the Revolutionary War area. Also, I might be able to do something at homes. One of the victims of the Precious Blood Flyer, and its 150th anniversary is next year. 71 people died in that fire in Hoyt. I know most of them lived in tenement homes, but I wonder if any of them lived in a home. I'd love to find out. Okay, that's the church. That's not the one that burned down. The one that burned down was a wooden one that was temporary. Okay, now, the way I'm going to end, because I'm such a rational guy, I don't know what to do about ghosts. How do you respond to ghosts? Well, it's claimed that this home, 250 Pleasant Street, is the most haunted house in Hoyt. Now, there's two things that might cause that are rational, but I'm probably wrong. And there's other reasons why it happened beyond the rational. One thing might be this. Holyoke has buried inside of it, found 61 Native American graves have been found in Holyoke. 59 of them in one place, and that would be right behind the modern day train station up on the hill behind that train station. And then 4 are scattered other places. But that's a lot of burials. That, in fact, that number is the second largest number in New England for found Native American burials. That's an incredible number. Why did Native Americans like to be here? Because the Great Falls of Holyoke was here. The biggest waterfall in New England was here. It was so large that the fish coming upstream had trouble getting upstream. The Native Americans could grab fish out of the water very easily. Plus the soil here was wonderful from all the floods putting wonderful silt in here. Maybe a lot of Native Americans would live here. Thus, if we found 63, how many more are there? And all those 63 are near the river. 250 Pleasant Street is about 200 yards from a river, maybe. It's also next to a ravine that used to have a stream in it. And that stream was called Silver Brook. It's long gone, but it used to have a stream there. So were natives burying at that location? And then that's a cause of ghosts. Or are there other reasons? The other reason is that house probably should never have been built there because the soil is too close to a gully, and the soil is a little bit too sandy. A contractor nowadays would never build there. Notice that in the 1940s, that group wanted to take it down, probably because they didn't think the house would withstand the test of time because of where it was built. Maybe the house shifts enough that you get a sense of noise. It also might be releasing gas. Methane gas is everywhere, and when the land shifts, it could release gas. So that's my rational thoughts. But people tell me I'm way too rational. My parents didn't tell me that. And I think you invited your
Spirit guide.
Your spirit guide. And I don't know if she wants to hear.
I've been to the Jambrito house several times. I'm blessed enough to be tapped into the spirit world. I don't consider them ghosts. I consider things spirit. Ghosts to me are creepy, and I don't engage with ghosts. I engage with positive spirits. I have been invited over to their home several times, which is an amazing place. I'm not afraid of spirits, but one day when I was sitting in her living room, and she was in the kitchen, and we were waiting for other guests, and above the fireplace there was banging and noises. It was not the house shifting, because my home shifts. We live in Chicopee, and I've experienced shifting. Noises, seeing things, hearing things, they're all good spirits. And it's a very, very interesting place to be.
Okay, thank you.
You might want to go over there if you get an invitation. Take a little tour and tell me what you hear and see.
Three people told me not to go there.
Lots of words, lots of words, they're good spirits. They're good
Including
spirits.
including his neighbor in the back on Church Street. Told me not to go there.
You might believe.
But 2 years ago, when I did this presentation, the owners of that house invited me over, and I loved it because it's so gorgeous. So maybe they'll do the same for me. Maybe I'll go. All right, now. Sorry about 5 minutes. Oh, but. All right, now there's a William Shakespeare play called A Midsummer Night's Dream. I read it in college, and when I saw this, I understood that this is a children's play based on the same theme. Right? It's a very fantasy-based play, and thus you get little fairies, the young children, and there's one character in the play called Puck. P-U-C-K, right? And he's a real tease of everyone. And there's also another character in the play called the Green Men, the Little Green Men, and these are them. Incredible. So these are all students at the school.
They're still there.
They're still
They're
there.
still
Yeah,
there.
the
Still there.
Yeah.